Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. If you just joined us, we have 2 poll questions on your screen. Please just take a few seconds to let us know about your current telework experience and satisfaction level with it. It'll just help us know where we're all at as a group. And then we'll get started in a few seconds with the webinar. Okay, I think we are going to get started. So once again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's 3rd and final webinar of our Telework series. I want to take a quick moment to introduce who we are. My name is Annie Arguello, and I am the Program Manager for the Commute Connector Program and your moderator for today. And today's guest speaker is Elham Shirazi. She is a principal at ePlanning and has over 30 years of experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating telework and flexible scheduling programs throughout the country. We're so happy to have her here today and share with us her expertise. Before we get started, I do want to outline some housekeeping rules, but first, I definitely want to take this moment to thank Phil Winters and Christine S. From the Center of Urban Transportation Research, known as CUTR, for volunteering their Adobe platform and facilitation of our webinar series. So a few things to note as we move forward with this webinar is that participants will be muted throughout the duration of the webinar. And if you have any questions for our speaker, please type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will answer them during the Q&A session. Also, today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on the 3 presenting sponsor websites next week. As well, recordings for the previous 2 webinars are also on those sites, so if you missed them, you can check them out there. Lastly, your feedback is important to us, so we would greatly appreciate it if you let us know how we did by completing a brief evaluation at the end of this webinar. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the Commuter Assistance Program. This webinar series is brought to you by the Florida Department of Transportation Commuter Assistance Program for District 1, for District 1's Commute Connector Program, District 5's Rethink Your Commute, and District 7's Commute Tampa Bay. Together, we cover 26 counties across Central and Southwest Florida, so that's a fairly large chunk of the state. Your local Commuter Assistance Program provide free employer consulting services to help identify, set up, implement, and maintain viable commute programs for employees. I also want to recognize one of our key partners, Best Workplaces for Commuters. This is a program that provides employers with national recognition and an elite designation for offering outstanding commuter benefits. To learn how your workplace can qualify and be recognized, please visit bestworkplaces.org. So I want to take a brief moment to highlight the Commute Connector program for the Florida Department of Transportation's District 1. We do serve 12 counties in the southwestern Florida. We are a program that is focused on improving shared mobility across the District 1 region. Through our program, we aim to do 3 main things: expand access to jobs by connecting employers and employees with mobility solutions to get to and from work, help reduce congestion, and strengthen our regional relationships to bring you more shared resources like this Telework webinar series. So we hope that you find this webinar valuable today. The topics that we'll cover include the current state of telework, building the case for teleworking, the importance of building guidelines to support telework programs, as well as tips for teleworkers like you and I, and steps you can take today to plan for the future. So without further ado, here's Elham Shirazi.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us. It seems like a lot of you did not have a lot of experience with teleworking prior to COVID-19. However, those of you who have now been teleworking seem to be very happy with the arrangement. The purpose of today is to give you some insight as to what is going on with teleworking during COVID-19. What are some steps that your organization can take to hopefully take this teleworking to the next level and make some of this behavior stick in the future, and then look at some alternatives. Okay? So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we're witnessing today is really not teleworking in its pure sense. Teleworking in its pure sense is supposed to be done without any distractions at home. It's when the kids are at school. It's when your child is in childcare, your dependents aren't there or don't need, your attention, and you're pretty much alone working and managing, small distractions that come up. However, what we have seen is that during COVID-19, we've gone into a state of extreme teleworking where everyone in the household is under one roof. We're working, homeschooling, providing childcare, cooking, baking, and getting stressed. A lot of people are watching too much TV. I'm going to blend in a lot of survey results throughout my presentation to indicate and show what we're seeing happen in the workplace during COVID-19. This particular survey, which was done by CNBC of 6 swing states in April, does show that, first of all, I think we need to always be mindful that about 60% of the population is not teleworking. So if you were teleworking or you are teleworking, you're amongst the 40% that could do this because your job lent itself to teleworking. About 9% of the teleworkers, of 9% of the population were remote workers before, 14% had teleworked before, and 19% are teleworking now. So just keep in mind, that we are a small percentage of the working population. Now, when we ask people, those who are teleworking, who are you co-working with? Who are your co-workers? Because now people refer to pets and kids and all those as co-workers. And the response to this, and this was a SHRM survey, the Society for Human Resource Management, was that 55% in multiple responses were allowed. So 55% either lived with pets or with significant others. A good 41% had children home or kids, and only 14% were just living by themselves. So keep in mind, this is kind of a distractful, environment for teleworking. Then the SHRM survey also asked people, how many times a day were you interrupted by others in the household? And as you can see, 66% said that between 0 to 5 times, and 13%, and actually, if you add those up, 33% said they were interrupted between 5 and 10 times. And a lot of people are using the video feature. I think that has become so prevalent that we are seeing a little bit of Zoom fatigue going on, and I know we're not using Zoom today, but I think people in general are getting a little tired of the interaction that happens virtually. So we'll talk about that a little bit further down. Now, typically when people work at home, they're supposed to have a designated workspace. Of course, in the case of the pandemic, a lot of people started teleworking without a lot of notice, and some people are lucky enough to have actually a separate room, or what they call the home office. So about half of them have a separate space, but a good over 30% are using the dining table. So this is not unusual. The couch and bed and all of that, those are really not proper places to telework from. They can, give you backache, but, sometimes we just have to do within the confines of what we have. And we'll go over ergonomics a little bit later. Now, actually, before I interject this survey, let's do a poll. I'm wondering, with the time that you're not commuting anymore to work, what are you spending that time on? So let's put up a poll and give you some choices. I'm seeing the poll results really low down on my screen. I don't know if how the rest of you are seeing it. Okay, great. So it seems like I see most people have voted. Okay, so so apparently the majority of you are saying that you're working more, and followed by doing hobbies and entertainment and spending time with family, sleeping, relaxing, which is all great. These results are a little different than what I've seen in some other surveys. I have to share that with you. In a lot of cases, we have seen that people know the number one thing that usually ties with, relaxing and other features. And this CNBC survey of the swing states, 6 swing states does show that, is that there are, a lot of people say that they're spending more time with their family, followed by relaxing, sleeping, hobbies, and entertainment, and then maybe working more. So we're seeing about 30% working more. Again, we're a small group here today, but over 40% of you said that you're working more, and that's not unusual. A lot of people do find that they do work more when they're teleworking. Now, Korn Ferry also did a survey. By the way, a lot of recruiting firms and hiring type of firms are doing surveys at this point. And the results of Korn Ferry's survey was that a lot of people are finding it a little difficult to concentrate because of all the distractions in their home. And, some of the top distractions are watching the news, which we're going to talk about, that definitely you should stay away from the news while you're working, getting worried about the virus and trying to work at home with kids and just worrying about the general state of things. So keep in mind, again, this is very different than teleworking in a normal situation. Now, when we look at once the economy opens up, what is the likelihood of people staying in, staying with the teleworking arrangement? And a good 24%, a quarter say that they would like to work either entirely or more from home compared to how they were working before. 55% of the teleworking population want to go back to the office, and 20% are unsure. So I think that as organizations, we need to take certain steps to at least keep as many trips as we can off the road. And I think right now a lot of people are so tired of the pandemic that all they want is going back to the old normal, which may not even happen for a while, depending on how the pandemic is spreading. And I have a feeling that as people start getting on the road, a lot of them might be reminded of how difficult and stressful the commute was and start changing their minds. So this is a slide that also deals with some of these distractions that people are having or their concerns. As you can see, the TV feature is high, and I highly, highly recommend that you tell your employees to shut down their TVs, just look at news after work. The lack of human interaction is an issue, Isolation is an issue for people who live alone, and even people who live with others and, who are younger than them. They miss the interaction with people, who are closer to their age or having similar experiences. Childcare has become a prevalent issue, especially I have never heard so many kids on conference calls and video conferences before while we were teleworking, but there's nothing, people can do with their smaller children. And they also miss interacting with other parents. So, this all adds to this element. Now, the right direction for us to head into as employers to have programs that allow for business continuity and make sure teleworking is happening in a planned and a well thoughtful process as opposed to haphazardly. So we do want you to think about what are some, not only that you're teleworking for the purposes of business continuity, but how else does teleworking tie back to your organization? And try to be mindful of these, because these are reasons which will help your management commit to teleworking also beyond COVID-19. As we have been hearing from teleworkers, they have been saying that they are as productive or more when they're teleworking, and even manager surveys are showing the same trend. I think as long as people are putting out the same productivity, obviously that's great. In a typical telework situation, we see an increase of 10 to 20% of productivity when people work at home. A lot of organizations want to offer flexibility. When you look at the younger generations, they look for jobs that offer flexibility. So teleworking, compressed work weeks, flex time, all of these are part and parcel of your flexibility program, as well as recruiting and retaining the right employees. I know that even up to months before COVID-19, we were seeing, that this was a definite pressure point for organizations. Obviously, right now, that may not be as strong because of the number of layoffs and furloughs, but teleworking can be a morale booster. It also impacts the bottom line from the perspective of overhead savings. And what I mean by that is if you're, an organization that leases space, what you may have realized during the last month is that you may not need all the overhead space and the parking space that you have. And you may think, that maybe going into the future, you might have a different arrangement. Some organizations are thinking that maybe what we do is only have some of the workforce obviously come in at first, and those would be essential workers. The non-essential workers, office workers, white-collar workers, they're thinking that they're going to let them telework maybe a little bit longer because then they can have social distancing at work for the essential group. But some organizations are going totally the other way and saying, we can bring Group A in 1 week and then have Group B work at home. Second week, we bring in Group B and Group A works at home. So some light bulbs are going on about, do we need an office per employee? And obviously, there is the issue of reducing commuting hours and stress that we're all mindful of. For teleworking to be operational, obviously, we've all had to step away from managing by presence. Although I did see a dreadful article yesterday that said some employers are asking employees to implement webcams so they can see when they're working. That is not the purpose of a webcam. A webcam is there to facilitate video conferencing and interaction and the sharing of documents when needed, during the day. And so teleworking is really based on trust. And we need to be deliverable oriented. We need to provide goals and direction to employees. We need to provide training if it isn't there for managing by objectives or MBOs. And it's also good to get the employees involved in this process by having them in an organized fashion develop milestones and deadlines, for a week or for a month of teleworking. And always manager's job is to provide feedback and make sure that that feedback is happening in a timely manner. I've talked to a lot of employees for teleworking, and this is exactly what they're doing. In fact, several teleworkers have told me even on a daily basis, sometimes they have to go over tasks in the morning with their managers, and then at the end of the day, talk about what was completed, but it's a 5-minute conversation in the morning, 5 minutes at the end of the day, and some people are just doing it on a weekly basis. Now, SHRM did a study back in 2014, and they were asking managers how they were measuring productivity. And I put this slide up just to demonstrate that, when you look at what was the most prevalent method of knowing how productive employees were, you see that number, of 48% were doing it by how quickly employees were communicating. So communication is really critical in this, in this time and going on. If you decide to go on with teleworking, 43% were, establishing goals and parameters. And I want to point out, of course, there are other reasons, but only 9% of the managers said that they were monitoring employees' output based on, when they logged on and when they logged off. So that's where we want managers to be. We don't want managers to be worried about when people start work and end work, because the emphasis should be on deliverables. And yes, hopefully they're getting their work hours in, but we have to have a level of trust in order to manage teleworkers and for this program to be useful. A 2018 survey, again, this is pre-COVID, and this was done by FlexJobs, another recruiting organization, and it did show that teleworkers, people who were interested in flexibility, said that they thought they would be more productive working at home than in a traditional office. In fact, the number was 65%. I think that the range which I went over with you, the 10 to 20% has been the norm. In fact, there was a Stanford study published in Harvard Business Review that showed the number to be something around 14% more productivity when people worked at home, and this was for output that was very measurable as opposed to output that was deliverable based. Now, this is just to show you results of how much flexibility people wanted pre-COVID, and as you can see, based on this survey, again done by FlexJobs, 80% of people wanted to telework. In terms of flexibility programs, the most popular was teleworking, whereby 80% of the people who responded to what kind of flexibility you'd like would have preferred teleworking. And you can see that that's followed by flexible schedules, and then some of the other options such as alternative schedule or telecommuting some of the day. So this was even very popular with employees. And when we look at how flexibility or the desire for flexibility breaks down by age group, as you can see, the younger employees are, the more likely they are to need flexibility. And then on the other side of the spectrum, the older they are, the less they are interested in flexibility, obviously, because they're probably preparing to go into retirement, or are more comfortable with coming to the office because it's what they've been doing all their lives. Now, the question comes up, are policies and procedures necessary for teleworking? I would say that if you want your programs to stick around and if you want them to grow, there should be some parameters that are placed. on what this telework arrangement is about. So one of the main reasons is that it protects employees and employers, and by having guidelines and parameters in place and showing what eligibility is about, what, talking about what makes jobs appropriate, what makes employees appropriate, what technology is available, makes a big difference in being able to have large numbers of people telework as opposed to the ones and twos that we were accommodating prior to COVID-19. So having those rules clear makes it a much more objective decision-making process for the organization as opposed to subjective. There are legal issues that do impact teleworking. I'll go over those in one of the next slides, but we want to make sure that you don't fall into any of those pitfalls. None of those have been a showstopper in the past. And we also want to be transparent and, make sure everybody is operating under the same guidelines. And as I said, to have policies that stick around after COVID-19. The size of employer does impact the formality of the program. So as you can see, 42% of employers overall offer policies, or this was prior to COVID-19, when, before COVID-19, we saw that about a good 60% did not have any policies in place. Now, the smaller an employer is, the less likely they were to have a policy. And we're hoping that these numbers will grow as a result of presentations like this and as a desire there for organizations to, basically allow people to telework more because it worked in this environment. I know this is a lot of information, but we get one chance to share it. So what are some laws and legalities to consider? Okay, the ones, and again, please consult with your attorneys. I am not an attorney, but I can tell you briefly, what these issues are. First of all, with wage and hours laws, you want to make sure that you are, first of all, for your non-exempt group, you are not going above 40 hours a week. Because if you do, then overtime comes into play. So we want to make sure you have something in your policy that says, before going into overtime, please do talk with your manager. And by the way, the overtime laws in the office are probably written the same way. So have employees refer back to that. And you are supposed to be able, for your non-exempt workers, again, to have a good recording capability of the hours worked. So that also falls into the home, whether it's an electronic, a kind of a time-checking device, or, whatever it is that will suffice from an HR perspective, that should be put into place. As far as workers' comp, and we'll get a little bit deeper into this issue, but when employees work at home, the home becomes an extension of the office. So employers often ask employees to have a designated workspace, which is a really good habit because you pay attention to the safety of that environment, the comfort of that environment, and to work in the same place when you're teleworking during your regular work hours or the hours you've decided with, and while doing functions that relate to work. If an accident happens in that designated workspace, typically, workers' comp would apply. Has this been a litigious area? No, it has not. Americans have been teleworking since the late 70s, and this has not ended up being a litigious area because we have people we trust who are teleworking. Pretty hard to get yourself into an accident while you're working at home. And you can't go in the kitchen, cut your hand, and say, oh, I was working. The other side of this is that OSHA does not require employers to conduct home inspections when people are teleworking. However, employers do usually have a clause in their policies or guidelines. By the way, you don't have to call it a policy. You can call it a guideline that says an employer will reserve the right to inspect a workplace with, so much advance notice. It could be, 48 hours. Sometimes if it's there's an injury, you might have to, send risk management right away. But the employer does reserve the right to inspect the workplace. If the question is how often are employers doing inspections of the home offices, the answer is not too often. And again, this has not been something that has been top of mind, but hopefully this will not become a litigious area and will not turn into a profession for some who come, and inspect the workspaces. By the way, managers should never be going to an employee's home to do anything. And if there is an accident, it's not the manager who goes out. It's someone who knows how to assess the safety of the workplace. ADA and FMLA do not have requirements for teleworking to be an accommodation. Can teleworking be an accommodation for FMLA or for ADA, Disabilities Act and Family and Medical Leave Act? Yes, they can, but it's never written into the telework policy. They deal with it on the ADA side or the FMLA side. You also should be careful how you craft and communicate the language within the policies so that there's no discrimination. And I've seen sometimes that employers put into their policy, teleworking is a privilege, teleworking is a benefit. You definitely want to stay away from such descriptions. And you want to just say telework is an alternative strategy for completing work. Because by saying it's a privilege or a perk, then we're creating haves and have-nots. And I think that's the last thing we want to be doing in this environment. Again, I want to emphasize, have any of these been a showstopper? No, they have not. And we've had thousands of people telework, millions in the past few years. I mean, and when I say thousands, I've seen 6,000 within Cox Communication, some of the latest numbers. I've seen programs with very, very large numbers, and none of these have been a big consideration. So what should your policies specify? I think what should be specified on your policies are what are the goals of the organization. If the goal is just do it for business continuity, then that does need. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure we haven't lost internet. No. If the goal is just to provide business continuity and your management has no desire to allow people to telework after, then maybe you should manage expectations now. But if you're going to put together some goals, we do want to make sure that within those goals you do have other reasons than business continuity and tie it back to morale and productivity and social distancing and whatever else there is. We do want to make sure that there's selection criteria in there. What kind of arrangements? Is it part-time? Is it full-time? We want to make sure that coverage is spelled out and, that communication needs are spelled out so people are cognizant that they should be in touch with the office, they should be available, accessible. And you want to also have some language on the technology, who provides the equipment, what is remote access like, what's the insurance in terms of the equipment. Usually if the employee provides it, it's the employee that covers it, and vice versa. And, obviously some discussion of the work site. This is a form that I shared a couple of webinars back with you. This can be used by an organization. In fact, we can make this one available if it's possible, or if you request it, we can send it to you. This is a Telework Form, which clearly asks, at the top, teleworker agrees to the following location, so their home address should be there. The location, yes, that should be their home address. The number of days should be specified. The dates, again, if it's just for business continuity. And as you can see, it goes on with the hours that are agreeable and, how often they should be checking voicemail and, email and all of that. And obviously, this form can get more complicated, but this is a very simple form. Typically in teleworking, there are certain milestones that are followed, and I don't see any reason why you can't go back to some of these milestones even after COVID. Make sure that management is on board. Have someone within the organization that works with a transition committee. And transition is not going to be go back tomorrow. There is going to be a transition period. So have a steering committee with membership from IT, from HR, from the departments that are impacted, from risk management, that puts together some of your policies and agreements and, and identifies how to, who's appropriate, who are the essential workers, who are the non-essential, and also has a training component for both the managers and the employees. And obviously we want to be troubleshooting and collecting data as we go ahead. Hopefully your technology infrastructure has gotten stronger, and we're seeing that a lot of organizations started with less but ended up for more. A very important component of this is also to have tips for teleworkers. We did have a session that was pre-recorded, that was recorded a few weeks ago on managing employees remotely. So some tips for employees, obviously accessibility, contact, making sure that their schedules include non-personal, time, work time, that they're available, as well as a personal non-available time. Because some families have split up the day into, two halves where one partner is taking care of the kids in the morning and another one in the afternoon and vice versa. So some of those indicators are really critical as to when, employees can be communicated with or when not. And, in fact, if the phone rings or employee gets, an email and they're not available, the easiest thing to do is just to text back and say, I'll get back to you. Some other rituals that we find important, have something that says, here's when the workday starts. Get out of your pajamas. You don't have to get dressed up, but, just wear comfortable clothes, have virtual breaks. A lot of employees are having virtual breaks, virtual coffee, virtual lunch, or sometimes they even share pet pictures and they share recipes. So they try to have some of that interaction, throughout the workday by breaking up the day. It's important to get up, move around, go for walks. Meditations become important to a lot of organizations. Some organizations even have a mindfulness hour where, employees, I think it's for 30 minutes, they can join that to de-stress. And my big pet peeve, which is also coming up in all the surveys, is stay away from the TV and the radio, and then have an end of the workday, very importantly. Teleworkers should have a dedicated workspace, as I mentioned. They should pay attention to their desk. They should have a surface space. I know some of you are sharing the kitchen table. By the way, working on glass is not recommended because glass can break. Try to invest in a comfortable chair. I've had teleworkers tell me I finally broke down and went out and bought that chair on rollers and an adjustable back and handrest. Lighting is important. You want to make sure you're reading at eye level. Do not have direct sunlight on your computer surface. Safety. Know where your fire extinguishers are. Know where your exits are. But also pay attention to your, how you've wired up your laptops and, your phones and, your printers so that others are not going to, fall or trip over them. Noise is not obviously part of the ergonomics package, but although we're forgiving people for extra noise these days, in a typical telework environment, it's not professional to have children speaking or other, household members saying anything, and it should be quiet. So if we can preserve that, great. I guess we have to be cognizant that we're all under one roof. Message to your family and friends: I'm home, I'm working. The material I have here from the office is for the office. Please don't use it. What should employers be tracking? I really do hope that you're tracking productivity during COVID-19 and working on resolving problems as they come up, working on, hearing from employees. Hopefully they have open communication with you as to what their problems were, what is their satisfaction, and documenting lessons learned. Now, the future of work at home needs planning now. I hope that some of the tools I reviewed are going to be useful to you. You do need to manage expectations. Technology is a key component going forward, but as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing a little bit of video fatigue right now, and articles coming out about it, so be cognizant of that. It's not bad sometimes just to speak and use audio conferencing. We are also seeing that some people will not want to continue, so that's something you should remember. Some employees are also getting better at self-selection. Maybe prior to COVID, a lot of people thought, oh, I know what it takes. But, now it could be that they've learned those skills. And by the way, their managers are getting better, are becoming better teleworkers. Please do think about Group A and Group B solutions, as I mentioned earlier, in that, there might be, some people who come in one week, you cleanse the office, and, the Group B comes in the next week, and you're switching off working from home. Some employers are thinking about creating multiple shifts so that although you may not have been in that kind of a situation, so not too many people are going to be in the same space at the same time. And these times are challenging, but I think it's a really great time to start planning for the future and make some of these blue skies stay with us and keep those trips off the road. Thank you. Just a few final points. Sorry, these are just some. I think we've run out of time for the presentation, but I was just going to highlight again that these were some of the points that came up, and now we're going to go to questions.
All right, thank you, Elham. There was definitely a lot of great information about the current state of telework and good tips on what we should be looking at moving forward and how to make sure that we have a successful telework program. We do have a few questions. I see one in the chat box, but we also have a few questions that we've received throughout the few weeks that we've held these webinar series. So we'll get started with a few questions. And then just a reminder for the folks that are on the line, please be sure to type your questions in the Q&A box. We're all going through this telework experiment, so feel free to add your questions no matter how small they may be. We have Elham here to help answer some of those questions that you may have. So the first one is, what are some recommendations or ideas for team building for a remote team? Do you have any thoughts on that, Elham?
Sure, and I do highly recommend you go back to our first webinar in this series, which dealt with managing remotely. However, collaboration should not stop because people are teleworking. Again, I think that as managers, we do have to always be mindful of setting a time up for, collaboration so that there are meetings which involve, the staff that are required. And I think managers should be very clear about when attendance is required for those meetings, in a virtual form. I also think that when you're brainstorming, with one person, whether it's two employees, whether it's a manager and an employee, pause. Hit the pause button and think who else should be involved in this conversation. And then, involve those other people. Today, with the, possibility of collaborative technologies, I think the only excuse we have for not using it is maybe not knowing how to use, those tools. So if you're not prepared, please spend the time to learn how to use them. But as I also mentioned, part of collaboration happens when you have these a water cooler time, a virtual lunch, when people get together, and they also share tips and tricks on how they're getting around issues. I have also seen employers do, hey, let's do a technology brown bag, so everybody gets online and, types in their issues, so that, they can resolve those. I hope some of those ideas help you.
Okay, those are good ideas. We have a few more questions again from the previous week that we think might be fitting for today. What do you think employers have learned from this rush of telework?
I think that employers are behaving the same way that most individuals behave in a stressful environment. I think a good 20% of employers have learned that, wow, teleworking can make a difference in my bottom line. People are working. The work is getting done. Employees seem to be okay, although their lives are challenging and they're managing quite a bit. And they're thinking to the future as to how do we reduce our carbon footprint? How do we, have people continue teleworking more? And, is this part of our plan? I think 60% of employers are honestly in a state of shock still, and they haven't prepared themselves for the next step. So I'm really hoping that the time that was spent by their management, working with employees has kind of helped build a case that teleworking can work, if you do it properly. So, and then, a good 20% of employers probably are really unsure right now as to what they're going to do. Some businesses, may even, not be there. So I would like to see that 20% number expand to be a bigger percentage of employers learning from the lessons that, yes, this is a great work alternative, and to make it part and parcel of the work environment.
Yeah, definitely great points. And the next question is sort of, is similar to the question about the rush to telework, but it's more along the lines of business continuity. So how will business continuity plans be changed going forward based on, your experiences working with employers throughout the country?
Every time there's been an emergency in any part of the country, I know that, people like myself have been involved in business continuity. And whether it's, your hurricanes in Florida, whether it's earthquakes in California, whether it's snowstorms, on, the East Coast, teleworking should really be part and parcel of those business continuity plans. I think now, if anyone forgets that lesson, it's a hard lesson to forget, right? So I'm hoping that this will definitely actually ask for more employers to prepare for business continuity, period, because a lot of employers are not doing that. But I think teleworking is there to stay.
Definitely sounds that way. We do have one question that came up on the chat. Are there recommended templates for policies, guidelines, agreements that could be used by an employer? Do you have any suggestions?
You can certainly search on the web for those. I'm sure that you can find some templates. In some areas, and I don't think, unfortunately Florida does not fall into that now, but public agencies do have a program that help prepare employers for, for teleworking. but certainly just type in telework policy or, agreement, and I'm sure there's a lot that comes up. There are a lot of organizations such as SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, and others that publish, some of these tools and templates.
That's a good point. We do have somebody just poked me with a question. To what extent are public agencies helping employers with telework? And in your recommendation, what could the Florida Commuter Assistance Programs do to help those employers further their telework program?
Well, I know that, there are public agencies in other parts of the country. Mm-hmm. These are, obviously agencies who've been typically in the business of transportation demand management that mm-hmm. also do assist employers with teleworking and, in fact, make it a big part of their mission. I'm not the right person to ask about the, the Florida Commuter Assistance Program, so I'll send that back to you guys.
Yeah, I mean, part of our commuter assistance programs is that all three programs that co-sponsor this webinar series is that we help employers and employees find different ways to get to work other than driving alone. So that would entail not only carpool, vanpool, transit, biking, and walking, but also some flexible work solutions that could be incorporated into commuter benefits for employees as well. So just wanted to highlight that.
I think also in the chat box, Annie,
yes.
Somebody said they can email the FDOT template policies and guidelines. So I guess someone from FDOT is offering resources. Florida Department of Transportation, and that's
yes, I think she was responding to Susan's question about templates and guidelines regarding telework. Okay, yeah. Thanks, Amy. We have about 5 minutes left. I did want to ask a question that came in last week from the previous webinar. What are some best practices to manage staff who are teleworking? And I know that this was addressed in some previous webinars, but it might be good to also address that here.
Sure.
Just to
I think, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Number one, I think, the exercise of setting goals, objectives, and deliverables whether it's a weekly basis, a daily basis. You may start daily and then go to weekly, and then eventually it might even be, once every other week. You do want to have a discussion with the employees about, what your expectations are as managers, what is the timeline that's required, what's the quantity of work that you're expecting, and there definitely has to be a feedback loop. So, make sure that not only you set goals, but you also review the goals in a timely manner, whether it's end of the week, whether it's the end of the day. And in a lot of cases, managers talk to employees and then ask the employees to write down what they're going to be doing. So it's good to involve the employees in developing their own deliverables and goals so that they become a little bit more self-directed. So that's, one of the rules. The other thing is, communication should be clear. Core hours should be clear. Flex hours, meaning how early can employees start, how late can they end. And again, these are typically set between employees and managers as a result of a discussion. These should be discussed up front. Don't get upset if someone's not available right now. In this emergency at 10 o'clock, maybe this was the time they had to take care of something. But having that discussion ahead of time, I think, makes it very transparent. Transparency is really critical in this process. Honesty. If mistakes come up, errors come up, problems arise, solve them. Share solutions with the bigger groups as to what are some issues that have come up, because everybody is learning in this environment. I think those are some that come to mind. I know that we're probably coming up against the clock, but and also building in the virtual collaboration, I think, is really a good idea. Don't over collaborate, and some employees have complained that their managers don't leave them alone and they don't get quiet time to do their work. Over monitoring is not what teleworking should be about, but it should be about productivity. It should be about meeting goals and being positive that we will get there. And hopefully that answers the question.
It does. And then just in the few minutes that we have left, if there's an employer, or someone that's interested in starting a telework program at their organization, where should they start?
I think if you are interested in starting a program, and the question is for the organization, I'm sorry, or for the individual?
It's where if I want to start a telework program at my company, where should I start?
Yes. I think the best thing you can do is actually right now try to learn very quickly from what's happening within the organization, so document lessons learned. And I think that you should find an executive champion. It's really good to have someone within HR or IT who says, yes, I'm open to this topic, so that they can take the cause further up your ladder. I think that it's also important to point out the return on investment from telework beyond business continuity, going back to some of the issues I discussed, like productivity, overhead, and recruitment retention. By the way, tardiness goes away with teleworking. People aren't stuck in traffic. And I think developing some soft parameters or policies would be a very good step.
Okay, great. These are all great questions as well as answers to hopefully provide us some guidance in the next step for our teleworking programs or how to establish one. Before we wrap up, is there anything else, Elham, that you'd want to cover? Just to some few parting words.
Sure. I just want to share that I think the U.S. population is hitting a little bit of a stress point because people are getting tired of social distance. But please be optimistic. Things will get better. We just have to plan for health and safety as well as continuity of the business.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for walking us through telework. And thank everyone for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. And just a few reminders that there will be an evaluation at the end of this webinar, so please feel free to take a moment and let us know how we did. Otherwise, please stay safe and have a wonderful weekend.